Title: My neighbor went crazy, she's standing outside my window with a lit candle. Have you ever had that uncomfortable feeling of being watched while you try to fall asleep at night? Well, let me tell you about the terrifying experience I had with my neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. It all started innocently enough, with a simple candlelit dinner party at her house. Little did I know, this gathering would be the catalyst for a series of disturbing events that would haunt my nights for weeks to come. Mrs. Johnson, a seemingly normal middle-aged woman, had always been friendly. She lived next door to me, and we often exchanged pleasantries in passing. I remember her inviting me to her dinner party one evening, promising a night of good food and great company. Curiosity piqued, I accepted the invitation, unaware of the nightmare that awaited me. Upon arrival, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. The dining room was adorned with elegant table settings, and the aroma of delicious food wafted through the air. The guests, a mix of neighbors and friends, chatted and laughed, seemingly oblivious to the twisted fate that awaited us all. As the night progressed, I began to notice something odd about Mrs. Johnson. Her once cheerful demeanor had shifted, her eyes darting around the room with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, like a predator waiting to strike. It wasn't until dessert that things took a sinister turn. Mrs. Johnson stood up abruptly, her face contorted with a mix of rage and madness. She grabbed a lit candle from the centerpiece and began to recite an eerie incantation that sent a chill down my spine. The room fell silent as we watched in disbelief, uncertain of what was happening. Suddenly, Mrs. Johnson's gaze fixated on me, and a malevolent smile spread across her face. As if possessed by some dark force, she lunged towards me, candle still in hand. Panic gripped me as I stumbled backward, desperately trying to escape her clutches. The other guests, paralyzed with fear, could only watch in horror as she closed in on me. By some stroke of luck, I managed to break free and sprinted towards the nearest exit. I could hear Mrs. Johnson's manic laughter echoing through the house as I ran for dear life. The night air was cold and unforgiving as I stumbled out onto the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought the nightmare was over, but I was wrong. For the next few nights, I found myself tormented by strange occurrences. Shadowy figures would appear outside my bedroom window, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I would wake up to find my front door wide open, despite having locked it securely before going to bed. It was as if Mrs. Johnson's madness had seeped into my own life, infecting my every waking moment. Sleep became an elusive luxury as the nights grew darker. Every creaking floorboard, every gust of wind, became a source of terror. What was once a haven of comfort had transformed into a prison of fear. I couldn't escape the feeling that Mrs. Johnson was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike once more. Desperate for answers, I reached out to local authorities, hoping they could shed some light on the situation. It was during their investigation that I learned the shocking truth about Mrs. Johnson. She had a history of mental illness, one that had gone unnoticed by those around her. Her descent into madness had been slow but steady, culminating in that fateful dinner party. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I sought solace in the fact that Mrs. Johnson was receiving the help she so desperately needed. The shadowy figures and eerie occurrences slowly faded away, replaced by a sense of relief and newfound tranquility. Though the scars of that night still lingered, I could finally rest easy knowing that Mrs. Johnson's reign of terror was over. So, the next time you feel that unsettling sensation while trying to fall asleep, remember my story and be grateful for the serenity of your own nights. For you never know when your friendly neighbor might go crazy, standing outside your window with a lit candle, ready to plunge you into a nightmare you never thought possible.